Story 1. Hello, my dear. Something happens when people taste blood. I saw my first vamp when I was 14 years old. It's not something that leaves your mind, even when you try to fill it up with good things instead. It happened at an arcade. Dad had brought me to show some retro game he used to play with his cousins. I was winning, about to set a high score when I heard the screams. They were blood-curdling. I looked at my dad. My heart had dropped somewhere into my stomach. He was pale, he was as scared as I was. We knew what those screams could mean. We saw every morning on the news a new face. Someone who had turned and killed or someone who had been killed by a vamp. Dad didn't wait to see who it was. He grabbed my shoulders and guided me straight to the exit. I shouldn't have looked back. When I did, I saw a picture that branded itself into my brain. Forever. The kid was cute, blonde with big blue eyes, little overalls. He was clamping his teeth into his young mother's breast, sucking furiously as she shrieked in pain. The nursing cloth that used to provide privacy was now spattered with blood and lay idle on the floor. Something I noticed as Dad rushed me out. I don't know what happened to the mother. All I knew was that she would never see her baby again. Not after the cops showed and took it to rehab. Everybody knows once you try human blood, you can't ever stop. It's why young mothers are warned to stop breastfeeding as soon as the babies develop teeth. Dad said it was rare for this to happen, that it was likely she already had a scab or a small cut and the baby had bitten after the initial taste. He gave a small seminar about her stupidity, not paying attention like that. I thought that it was pointless to criticize her. Her baby was gone. She had learned her lesson, and so had I. I would never breastfeed in my life. I was paranoid for a long time. I refused to floss despite knowing it was impossible to turn with my own blood. I wouldn't share chapstick or kitchen utensils. I lived in constant anxiety and fear. Then one night, my worst nightmare came to reality. I was walking home when I saw a man rapidly approaching from across the street. His mouth and chin were covered in dark blood. Fresh. I froze in fear. I couldn't move a muscle. Something clicked when I saw he was wielding a small knife, tipped with blood. I can't die. Not like this. I ran with energy and speed I hadn't thought possible. While running, I tried to think of what to do, how to protect myself. I scanned the area in front of me and located a trash can on the corner of the street. Litter surrounded the bottom. I saw the top of a glass bottle peeking out of the top. I ran as fast as I could toward the trash. When I arrived at the bin, I speedily grabbed the bottle out, scanning it first for traces of blood due to years of paranoid habit. I closed my eyes when I crashed the bottle down on the curb, creating a makeshift knife. I did all this in the 10 seconds it took for him to reach me. I didn't let him make the first move. I was aware it was my life or his. I aimed for his throat, my heart pounding in my ears. I screamed when I stabbed him. I was still screaming as blood gushed out of his neck. He tried to stop the blood with his hands, clutching the hole in his neck. In doing so, he dropped his knife, which clattered onto the road. He faltered, gasping for air. After I stabbed him, I wanted to run. I mentally commanded my body to move as he bled out, but I was frozen. He looked at me with desperation and despair in his eyes. Even in my intense fear, for a moment I felt pity for him. Then, with the speed of a striking snake, his hand left his bleeding wound and he grabbed my hair. He pulled so hard I yelled in pain. When I did, he stuck his fingers in my mouth. I couldn't process what had just happened before I felt it. The most amazing feeling. It was like every worry was melted away. I was calm, floating up and up and up till I went from happy to ecstatic to a place where I felt like I was dreaming. This happened in 20 seconds, but it felt like time had frozen. When I came to, the man was lying on the street. Blood was still oozing out, but the animation had left his eyes. He was smiling. I knew why. He had chosen to do a noble thing in death. He had opened my eyes. Something I had been running from my whole life was something I should have been chasing. I now couldn't imagine life without another taste, as many as I could get. I knew I needed to run before anyone saw me and the cops came and took me away. But I had to take some with me. I took off my jacket and saturated a sleeve in the blood coming from his neck. As I did, I made sure that the sleeve didn't touch the road. I was going to drink every drop, and who knows what germs could be on the street. I wrapped the sleeve with the rest of the jacket and ran in the direction of my home, holding tightly to my newfound treasure. As I ran, I wanted so badly to try another drop, but I knew I would black out and didn't know for how long. As I gasped deep breaths of the chilly autumn air, it registered. I killed someone. I shook the thought out of my head. It was self-defense, and I had a whole new life now. When I got home, I squeezed all I could from the sleeve and stored it best I could manage. Life has been somewhat surreal since then. Every day is stretched out endlessly now. I'm timeless. The blood is going bad. Soon I'll run out. It doesn't matter. I'm free. I'll live eons in days. I'm timeless. Story 2. I stayed out at the lake too late on an evening of a new moon. I was told to be off the land before sundown. The park ranger was very adamant that I had to be gone by then tonight because that's when the park closed. He really emphasized tonight, which I thought was strange, but I followed his rule. I was the only person fishing the lake. It was beautiful and the fish were still biting, but I turned back plenty early. It was a decent walk on the trail because of the way the trail winds around the outer part of the property. I just got back to the truck when several vehicles pulled up to the parking area. "What the hell?" I said out loud. I could see the ranger in the entrance gate building, and he just let them through. Then several more came in. So much for the park closing by sundown. All the people getting out of the vehicles were elderly folks. I thought, what the hell do these old people need the whole park for? It's a state park, they don't deserve the whole thing. I remember thinking some of these small-town people around here think they own all this, but we all do right. So, Horrifying. I grabbed my stuff and headed back out to the lake. I had time to get some more good fishing in. I figured no one would even notice I'm there, and I really wanted to bring home some keepers. God, I wish I could have just left. On my way back, I decided to go off the trail and cut through a part of the forest. I remember thinking, is this a good idea? Then continuing on anyway. It really wasn't that bad at first, and I wasn't carrying that much other than a pole, a small tackle box, and a bucket. Though the fish were biting, they weren't big enough to bother bringing home, so my bucket was empty. The walk started to seem like it was taking a little too long when I noticed the sun was completely gone. The sky was black. It was a clear night and there were stars, but there was no moon. As I went further, the ground was more and more covered in brush. It was tripping me up. With no light except for stars, only feeling my way through, it was like sinking deeper and deeper. Everything seemed larger, or I felt smaller, but I continued on as my instinct told me to. I got a strange chill and I stopped, froze completely. Then I threw my gear down and froze again. Everything was silent for a moment. Then I heard a cracking noise. Probably a small animal, I thought. I heard the same noise, but a little louder and closer. Then crunching and crackling surrounded me, and a large dark figure, the size of a tree, raised from the ground around me. It was like the forest was a giant moving being that had awakened, suddenly and angrily. A deep low growl followed the crunching noise of the branches that were enclosing me. And then I was running, my feet taking me so quickly I couldn't comprehend it beginning. I don't remember the surroundings, just the feeling of the cool air and branches cutting against my face. Then up a hill, a light. There was a small pavilion with lanterns around it and a few picnic tables. People were all around talking casually. It was the old people I had seen earlier. The tables were set up with food and drinks. It was so surreal, but I was too panicked to care. I tried to speak, but was too out of breath. "Whoa, where'd you come from?" one person said. Still out of breath, I tried to reply. "Sorry, couldn't understand you, buddy," he said before turning away from me, continuing to his conversation with the others at this gathering. It was all very odd and frustrating. Then I gathered myself enough to speak. "There is something," I said while pointing to the woods. Now they all paused their conversations and are looking at me curiously. "Something big is out there," I said. But confusingly to me, they all started smiling. I was irritated by them, thinking that they thought I was crazy. "What are you all doing out here anyway?" "You've got to listen to me," I said. I glanced around at them as they just stared at me. Then they all started moving in a little closer. Okay. One of them said in a trying to be calming but condescending way. His hands motioned a let's bring it down kind of motion. I was annoyed and looked away from him and glanced over at their picnic table. A shiver went down my spine. That's when I actually got a look at what was on the table. It looked like raw meat, hunks of flesh in foil pans and Tupperware containers. One with scalps, hair hanging over the side of it and part of a human face inside it. They lunged toward me and pulled me to the ground with strength and speed unbelievable for the look of them. An old woman in a giddy voice said, "Our meager offering just got a little more tantalizing." The deep growl came out of the forest behind them louder this time than before. They turned and I broke free and ran. "No!" yelled that woman that was so giddy before, but a man stopped her and snapped, "We have no time, get into place." From a distance, I watched a giant figure dark as the night emerge, horns or branches coming from it at all sides. They gathered to the sides of the pavilion showing their offering. A man stepped forward and said, "Our Lord of the New Moon, please accept our offering for another month of youth." The figure engulfed the pavilion but must not have been satisfied. The man that spoke screamed and I could see blood gushing everywhere as if he were squeezed. I ran, found my way to the trail, sprinted the whole way to the parking lot, got in my truck and sped off. About a week has passed and that night all seemed like nothing more than a dream. A really messed up dream. In fact, my luck has been pretty good since then. Work is going good. I work in an auto shop and my boss hasn't been up my ass all week like he usually is. I won $50 on a scratcher. Not much, but I'll take it. And I hit it off with this girl who brought her car in, which never happens to me. All seemed great in my week, which really had me questioning what I saw. At dinner, me and Heather, the girl I met earlier, were really getting along. She laughed at all my jokes, which is always a good sign since they really aren't that funny. Everything was great. Something about her seemed almost familiar. We were talking about where the rest of the night should take us. Then she said, "We could just head over to my place." I was all in. Then she said, "At home I can change into this new thing I bought." I was choking on my words, just nodding. Then she said, "It might be a little more tantalizing." With a giggle, the life fled from my body. Her voice, the word tantalizing, the way she said it, it was her. This was the old woman that was in the woods. They knew where to find me. They are probably going to kill me because of what I've seen. I'm in the restroom of the restaurant now. I think she might know that I know. My exit was less than graceful. I've peeked out the door to see if anyone else is watching, but I don't know. I don't know who to trust, that's why I'm reaching out for someone to believe me. I don't know who I know that will actually believe me. FML, I'm afraid I might be kidnapped and fed to some woodland beast. Story 3. Copy. Paste. Curse, people can be so stupid, Carl said, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his phone. The kids were upstairs, and we were just starting to unwind. What that meant was we were fooling around on our phones in the dimly lit living room. The worn leather couch creaked as I shifted, hoping the children were finally asleep. It had been a long day, filled with the usual chaos of raising 3 kids in a small house. Carl, my husband of 12 years, continued, his face etched with the familiar lines of stress that had become more pronounced in recent months. My cousin copied this post to his Facebook feed. "Don't forget, tomorrow starts the new Facebook rule where they can use your photos. I do not give Facebook or any entities associated with Facebook permission to use my photos, information, messages." People really think this works. They believe copying and pasting this text will somehow opt them out of a TOS. I glanced at Carl, noting how he lived for getting upset at what he saw as his family members' gullibility. "The most baffling thing is who originally makes these and what do they get out of it?" he asked, really on a tear now. "Do you remember chain letters?" I replied, not understanding why he even still visited Facebook. All I could figure was that he got a dopamine hit from getting irritated. You know, send a copy of this to 10 people you know or else something bad is going to happen to you. I think someone just gets a kick out of making people do things and wasting their time. They want to see how far they can get the letter to travel or how many people they can get to participate. Carl nodded, considering my words. I think we're being too logical about this, he said after a moment. Is it possible that some people think they have the power to bestow luck onto another person? Maybe it's kind of like Ringu, right? Do they think they have the psychic powers of Sadako? I couldn't help but smile. Trust Carl to direct the conversation to his favorite subject, J-horror. Make a copy of the tape within 7 days. Pass it on to someone else and it breaks the curse, at least for you, I said, reciting the plot to a movie he made me watch countless times. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, followed by a piercing scream. Carl bolted upright, his phone clattering to the hardwood floor. What was that? He barked, his eyes wide with alarm. I don't know, I said, my heart racing. I thought they were going to bed. Carl stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. I can't stand this. They always do this kind of shit. This has to stop tonight. Carl is usually calm, but sometimes things rub him the wrong way, and his temper flares. Tonight was one of those times. As he stormed up the carpeted stairs, each step a thunderous stomp, I couldn't help but remember the gentle man I'd fallen in love with. The man who would spend hours playing make-believe with the kids, his laughter echoing through the house. That man seemed to be appearing less and less these days. Perhaps it was his 60-hour-a-week job. Maybe he spent too much time looking at social media. Whatever the cause, this last month is the most stressed I'd ever seen him. I followed him up to the kids' room, my mind racing. We live in a modest 2-bedroom house. Its walls adorned with family photos and children's artwork. Our 3 kids share one room, which often makes bedtime a challenge. The oldest is Charlotte is 12, Abby is our middle child at 10, and our youngest is Connor at 8 years old. At the top of the stairs, Carl took a sharp right, his shoulder brushing against the pale yellow wall we hadn't been able to repaint in years. He violently yanked open the door, slamming it into the wall with a resounding thud. A framed picture of the kids at the beach rattled precariously, a memento from our last family vacation 3 years ago. The scene inside the room was surreal. The 3 children sat in a circle on the plush blue carpet, illuminated by the soft glow of an astronaut-shaped night light. Charlotte had her back to us, her shoulders hunched. Connor's face was pale, his freckles standing out starkly against his skin. He looked deathly afraid, his wide eyes darting between his sisters and us. "You're supposed to be asleep. What are you 3 doing?" Carl shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls covered in glow-in-the-dark star stickers. Connor pointed a trembling fingers in the direction of Charlotte. "Abby jinxed her," he stammered. "They said the same thing at the same time. Now she can't talk till somebody says her name," said Abby calmly as she turned to face us. Whatever had Connor on edge didn't seem to affect her. There was something unsettling about Abby's composure, a glint in her eye that I'd never noticed before. I didn't think Carl could look any angrier until that moment. His face turned a deep shade of red, and if it were possible for steam to expel from his ears, it would be happening. I could see the vein in his temple throbbing, a sure sign that he was about to explode. "I wish you would just do what I ask," Carl barked, his voice rising. "We told you 3 to go to bed, and you're up here playing games." Charlotte laid her head in her hands, her curls falling forward to hide her face. Connor looked even more frightened than before, but it wasn't because of Carl's shouting. Those 2 didn't seem to notice his rant. Abby lowered her head, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her pajama top. She was the only one who appeared to be listening. "I am so tired of repeating myself over and over. You are the worst kids ever. Now please, do what I say, just this once." I watched Abby carefully and noticed her lips move slightly, barely audibly mouthing those last 3 words along with Carl. He did say that phrase to the kids quite often. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how much our family dynamics had changed. When had our home become filled with so much tension and anger? Abby then looked Carl right in the eyes, her gaze unervingly steady for a child her age. She softly retorted, "Jinx." Carl's hands flew to his mouth, his eyes growing wide with shock and confusion. He turned to me, his gaze pleading. Slowly, he lowered his hands to reveal smooth, unbroken skin where his mouth should have been. At the same time, Charlotte turned around, and I gasped as I saw that she too was missing her mouth. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Every child knows the jinx game, the silly rule that if you say the same thing at the same time, you can't speak until someone says your name. But this was different. This was impossible. As the reality of the situation sank in, a mixture of emotions washed over me. Fear, seeing my husband and daughter's faces smooth where their mouths should be. Confusion, as my mind struggled to rationalize what couldn't be real. And strangely, a hint of relief. The only thing I knew for certain was that none of us were in a hurry to say Carl's name. Story 4. Time has stopped at Vienna International Airport. The title is rather self-explanatory. I'm at Vienna International Airport, and everything is frozen in time. All the morning passengers are here, all of them unmoving like fleshy, warm statues. Looking outside through the window, I see a flight departing, suspended in the air. Next to me, a woman is dropping her handbag, and all the contents are frozen in the air, unaffected by gravity's pull. Suppose I can elaborate a bit, as at the moment it appears that I have all the time in the world. I was on a business trip in Vienna, and I had to travel back to Paris CDG Airport with an early morning flight. On the way towards the terminal, staring out of the cab, I saw the airport lights in the dim, cloudy dawn sky. Some of the departing planes were awfully slow, almost like they were not moving at all. I was thinking of pointing this out to the cabbie, but I chalked it up to tiredness. See, after-conference networking cocktails and 6 a.m. flights are not a great combination, so I was far from being in a chatty mood. Either way, the guy dropped me off, and I decided to have a quick ciggy before checking in. While smoking, I wondered about airports, how fascinating they are. A while ago, during my university years, I had a part-time bartender job at one, and I always found them eerie. They were liminal spaces, areas of the in-between, people just heading there to pass through it, sort of a border world. Of course, seeing airports like that could have been Stockholm Syndrome caused by this student job as well. After all, I needed some sense of wonder to tolerate 5M shifts. And now, many years later, here I am, at 5M again, but this time as one of the travelers, a wandering soul lost in the liminal landscape. I let out a brief laugh. The hangover left me way too philosophical. Yet, the eerie feeling I had turned out to be more of a premonition, rather than a hung-over inner monologue ramble. Things took a sharp turn for the weird at security. While there were quite a few people, many gates were open, so the crowd moved fast. I got directed towards a freshly opened security station. It was surrounded by tired-looking officers. One instructing me to put my laptops and fluid containers on separate trays, the other two standing behind the metal detector gate, waving me through, and a third one slightly peculiar. He was sitting behind the monitor of the X-ray machine you put your bags through, wearing huge aviators basically covering half his face. Well, I figured you gotta make a fashion statement somehow, even if you're obligated to wear a uniform. Anyways, I was about to walk through the gate, the metal detector, the symbolic border between the mundane and the liminal. But the very moment I stepped through it, complete silence engulfed everything. I reflectively touched my ear, thinking my earbuds somehow turned on noise canceling, when I realized that they were in the tray, which slowly rolled down on the pickup area. And that was the only thing moving. Everything else stopped, like someone hitting a pause button. Odd, I figured. I slowly walked back through the gate, but nothing changed. Everything around me stood still. The security guy's hand frozen in a bored wave, a man putting his belt back on unmoving next to me, a family in the other queue, stuck in mid-argument, their small kid, her face trapped in a mid-crying expression, but no sound leaving her mouth. Wish I could do this to kids once the plane took off. Nevertheless, temporal anomalies be damned. I did not want to miss my plane, so I grabbed my stuff from the tray. Yet, as I was putting my laptop back into my bag, I saw one thing, or, well, the absence of it. The security guy with the sunglasses was nowhere to be found. This whole thing did not look like something that respects airport security standards. Walking towards my gate, D24, in the dead silence was certainly an experience. I moved through crowds in suspended animation, or I sure as hell I hope it was that. It would be rather awkward to be at an airport full of dead people. Still, it had a certain beauty. Upon arriving to D24, an unusual sight welcomed me. The monitors showed that boarding was open, and indeed, the doors were ajar, but the flight destination, instead of Paris CDG, just looked like a jumbled mess of characters. Now, while my app said that this was the correct gate, I did not want to end up at the wrong location, so I decided on not boarding for now, waiting it out instead, hoping that a staff member or an announcement will clear up the confusion soon. I was a bit hungry, and the nearby bar seemed, albeit overpriced, but fairly attractive. I walked over, crisscrossing the statue-like crowds. I grabbed a sandwich, and as the staff was unavailable on account of being frozen in time, I decided to walk behind the till to the coffee machine and help myself to some drinks. For a moment, I entertained the thought of making myself a nice flat white, but I figured that if time restarts and I am standing in a restricted area steaming milk, I may get some angry looks, so I opted for an espresso instead. The tiny cup was halfway through when I heard something familiar. The breaking news announcement of Euronews on a nearby TV screen. Well, something apart from me was unaffected by this time fuckery, so I quickly grabbed my coffee and my sandwich. The total was €12.30, so I put a tenner on the counter and figured they can keep the change. Indeed, at the back of the bar, there was a TV broadcasting the morning news, oblivious to the frozen world around it. Chief investigator of the crash of Air France flight ***********. I have hidden the flight ID, just in case. At Vienna Schwechat International Airport this morning states that at this time, the exact cause of the accident cannot be determined. While the number of confirmed casualties just passed 80, the search for survivors continues. According to witness testimonies, the aircraft overran the runway during takeoff and crashed into the industrial area of Schwadorf, a settlement near the airport. Authorities have asked the public to forward any information, including recordings of the events, to the authorities. Rather macabre watching these news at an airport, I was thinking when it hit me like a freight train or like a crashing plane, the flight they were talking about was the one I was supposed to board. Now, while I was trying to cut down on my smoking, this news warranted another cigarette. The airport has a nice smoking area, looking at the runway where a flight was taking off, except it wasn't, as it was just floating silently, in a surreal manner. Some sight for a smoke. Yet, as I was clicking my lighter, I noticed something weird. Well, something that should have not been weird, but in this specific scenario, it was rather unusual. A few airport technician-looking guys in high-visibility vests, cargo pants, and despite the cloudy early morning, dark aviator sunglasses were walking around. Actually walking while the world around them was dead still. I'm back now at the restaurant, typing this down on my laptop. Now, I know that my demeanor may feel like I'm not taking the situation seriously enough, but trust me, this is my defense mechanism when I am positively shitting myself, which is pretty much the case now. I'm not stupid. I saw the news of my crashed plane, and I can connect the dots. I'm wondering if this is limbo, death, or some otherworldly shit, but the call of nature is disrupting my spiral into anxiety. After the coffee and the ciggy, I'm not only about to shit myself figuratively, but also literally, so I will try to hunt down a bathroom in this hellscape of an airport. I'll check back in a bit to see if anyone's around, and update y'all. Cheerio. So I went to answer the call of nature. Luckily, 1 out of the 4 stalls was open at least. I was also not jealous of the poor bastards whom eternity found in the middle of dropping a log. So, I was doing my business when I noticed feet. First, I could see shadows under the stall door, through the gap, then 2 pairs of work shoes, 2 people walking around in the bathroom. Now, I was about to call out, but something held me back, on top of how awkward it is to have a mid-shit conversation. Soon I realized what set my alarms off. I saw the feet, but I did not hear them. They were walking in complete silence until they started talking. I reckon they were talking, but I couldn't understand shit. Saying their words were garbled is an understatement. It sounded like a recording of an already foreign language being played backwards, while distorted via a radio. So, I clenched my buttocks and remained silent until they left. I was not against the idea of trying to communicate with whatever these lads were, but the situation was not exactly ideal, so I decided to delay. Instead of immediately heading back towards the bar near my gate where I've left my luggage and my laptop, I wandered around a little bit, as my plane was not about to leave. Upon inspecting the motionless terminal, I found some of the guys I've seen earlier on the runway and in the toilet. Contrasting how everything was halted around them, they stood out being busybodies, but they were always behind locked doors on different floors or otherwise inaccessible territories, in parts that you would normally not notice while wandering around an airport. Forgive me for sounding like a broken record with the whole liminal spaces thing, but this was another aspect of that. When you're at a place like this, a place of transition, there are so many little nooks and crannies you just look straight through. At an airport, you move with purpose, everyone moves with purpose, so these areas escape your attention. Now, it was the contrary in an uncanny way. Noon moved with purpose, noon moved, period, except in these hidden places, which highlighted them, making me feel like I'm seeing things I shouldn't be seeing. However, this was not reciprocated. See, I was not particularly hiding, yet none of the employees appeared to react to me in any way. It looked like I had two options: reenact the movie Terminal, except in this ghost airport, or just take my chances to get noticed. So I chose the latter. I started waving at them through the windows of locked doors and shouting at them from floors below, yet they all remained unfazed. Pretty fucking rude, honestly. Or at least this was the case until I got back to my spot. Then things escalated. Returning to the bar where I left my laptop and bags, I could see 3 of these airport security-looking guys carefully circling my luggage, discussing it in their garbled radio language. However, upon my arrival, unlike the other airport staff, this trio noticed me, and they made it painfully obvious that they did. As soon as I approached, they turned towards me in perfect unison. Now, I know that leaving your bags unattended like that is a big no-no at airports, and in a normal situation I wouldn't have done so, but it's rather clear that this was far from what could be considered normal. I hoped that they would agree, so I apologetically explained to them that I was just heading to the pisser for a little bit. My excuse did not seem to convince them. The 2 dudes on the side kept staring at me through their oversized sunglasses, unmoving, while the third one began to walk towards me with seemingly malicious intent. I attempted to defuse the situation diplomatically, but seeing how he steadily moved his hand towards a black, taser-looking device holstered on his belt, I concluded that my charisma will not save me today. So I resorted to the next best alternative: violence. I know full well that my following reaction was not a rational, well-adjusted one. Assaulting airport staff is a fine way to get banned from flying for life after all. But let me explain. See, in my late teenage years, I had a short stint as an employee at a shoddy nightclub. Some of my experiences there irreversibly altered my fight or flight instinct into punch first, ask questions later. And believe me, I felt threatened enough to have my reflexes take over. So anyways, I swung at the bastard. Admittedly, I am not in my best shape, definitely not after last night, so I was somewhat surprised seeing him collapse like a sack of flour as soon as my knuckles connected to his face, sending his earpiece, cap, and glasses flying. I was somewhat even more surprised seeing the other 2 guards immediately dematerialize in the same moment. Just gone in a blink. I began to suspect that these guys were not your usual bored, underpaid, caffeine-addicted airport staff, but something more sinister. Soon enough, my suspicion became certainty. The less lucky one of these entities, I whacked laid in front of me, face down, to see the damage I may have caused, and to check his pulse just in case. I grabbed his shoulders and turned him on his back so he faced towards me. Now, remember I said these guys looked like normal airport employees? Well, there was a little bit of a difference. The guy had like a million eyes. The face, previously covered by the dark tinted lenses, which now lay shattered on the floor, stared at me with countless pupils. Small ones, big ones, just dotted all over the sockets, in a way that should not be possible. Not entirely unlike a spider, but way more crowded. In fact, there were simply too many of them. They should have not fit the space normally only occupied by two eyes, yet there they were, kind of like a Mandelbrot fractal. They appeared to be almost infinite and frankly fairly hypnotic. But I had to snap out of it. For the lack of anything better to do, I figured I'd sit down and type this update. I have mixed feelings about the situation. On the one hand, I'm somewhat relieved that I didn't ruin the day of some poor bastard at the airport, AMD parallelly, didn't ruin my chances of me flying ever again. But in the meantime, I am a tad perplexed by what could be the consequences for KYNG, a timeless, slightly eldritch entity. On top of that, I can't really get those eyes out of my mind, and not in a romantic way. See, no pun intended. I honestly don't know for how long I was staring into them, but once I was out of it, I felt like I remembered something. I'm not too sure what yet, but I think I'll take another smoke break to try and figure it out. Here's hoping that my pal won't go anywhere. I'll get back to y'all soon. Midway through my ciggy, I realized that the unconscious guy may have a way of entering those little hidden areas I was ranting about beforehand. Since at this point I was fairly certain that the areas accessible for passengers won't hold any answers, I figured I could borrow a keycard. Spare me from the moral lesson of looting from a hopefully only unconscious entity. Of course, these security gates also require a password in addition to the keycard, but since apart from the trio messing with my luggage, no one acknowledged my existence, it was not particularly difficult to follow one of these mysterious walkers towards an off-limits area and peek at the 4 digits password over their shoulders. The key code was, I shit you not, 4444. Airport security my ass. I opened the security door and entered a bland, white, blindingly lit hallway, leaving the passenger area, with its soothing colors, kitschy decorations and fake plants, and entering a blindingly lit, barren security hallway. Surprisingly, it didn't give me as much of a whiplash as I expected it would. Of course, this corridor had none of the artificially welcoming atmosphere of the Traveler's Lounge, but it still felt like that the two areas were related. I can already hear your snarky comments saying, yes, both are parts of the airport, dumbass, but it's not that. It felt like the empty corridor represented the reality of this place, and outside of it, all the bits and bobs that made it feel welcoming were just there to ease people in a sense of familiarity instead of liminality. But here, behind the thick blue doors, that poorly fitting facade was dropped. No siree, no comfy feelings, colorful advertisements and €2 massage chairs here for you. The corridor screamed, through the humming of the bright white neon lights, that you're a stranger, and you shouldn't be here. Too bad I got used to people screaming at me not to do things, then doing them anyways, and corridors, I guess, kinda ruined that metaphor here. So I marched on, peering into barren office rooms, some of them containing some oblivious airport entities, their real self hidden behind their sunglasses. After a bit of wandering, I noticed an area labeled monitoring room, and on a whim, I entered. The label didn't lie. There sure were some monitors in there. Like a lot of monitors, way too many for it to fit a room of this size. They weirdly reminded me of the jumbled mess of eyes the entity I knocked out. And, as this thought entered my mind and I remembered staring into those eyes, the smorgasbord of screens suddenly started to make sense, and I began to see security camera footage steadily shifting through all of them. At first glance, they appeared to be normal security feeds, but upon closer inspection, I noticed some increasingly unusual things at each one I looked at. The first anomaly I noticed was an image depicting the frozen scenery at the departure gates, including the big board listing all the flights, flight numbers, and destinations. Except apparently the 1300 Aeroflot flight was scheduled to leave to Pulkovo Airport, Leningrad. On another screen, the corridor with unmoving people had big billboards behind them, one of them proudly displaying a vaguely familiar, elderly guy who, despite looking 80+, still had a fabulous pompadour haircut, and next to it, with big bold letters, The King 90 Elvis Live at Ernst Happel Stadion, Vienna, January 8th. On another, every sign and advertisement was written in German. I am in Austria, but still, the complete lack of English was unusual in an international airport. In addition, airport security was wearing uncomfortably sharp uniforms with red armbands. As I looked closer in a corner of the screen, I had to do a double take, as a sizable portrait of a certain mustached failed artist and piece of shit was there on full display. Each screen I looked at showed this airport, but subtly or less subtly altered. I was witnessing different realities from a nondescript nerve center. After a certain point, I found the security footage of the little bar I left my stuff at earlier. And I noticed something pretty upsetting, and bear in mind, after seeing a long dead dictator's painting on a wall, the bar to upset me was placed pretty fucking high. See, you remember that TV I've seen the news report of the plane crash of my flight. I could kind of make out through the security screens that it was still broadcasting about the accident. The issue is, the broadcast was the same in all the alternative realities, no matter how many screens I was looking at. Apparently there are some worlds where Elvis survives or where the USSR still stands, but it appears that my fucking plane overshoots the runaway and blows up in each one. Bit of a bummer, really. I snapped out of staring at the screen thanks to the beep of a walkie-talkie laid down on the table next to the screens. The sound was followed by a conversation of the airport staff in their unusual, incomprehensible language, until it stopped being incomprehensible. As I started to focus on it, just like on the creature's eyes, and later on the screens, I simply realized that I understood what they were saying. I'll try my best to translate. Execution error for Cornerstone event number 4778, due to passenger/victim manifest incomplete. Please advise Handler A out. Handler A, we may have an update on your situation. Analytics department confirmed the identity of the interloper. Missing Cornerstone event manifest parameters are at value match with interloper. Handler B out. You know those moments when two people are shit-talking a third one, not knowing that said third person is within clear earshot of them? The whole stitch began to feel like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you figured out who they refer to as interloper the same time as I did, yours truly. Now, as the subject of the conversation, I felt that I was warranted to contribute. So I pressed the button on the radio, and, to the best of my ability, I tried to speak in their language and mimic their expert talking style. Handler A, Handler B, this is interloper reporting. Please advise on how to assist in resolving issue with Cornerstone event parameters. Interloper out. A bit of inconvenient silence followed. I had a feeling that someone was about to be fired. Roger that, interloper. Please stand by until HQ is instructed. More silence. This is Handler A to HQ. Initiate Cornerstone event rollback. Active Handler group. This is HQ. Please confirm rollback request. I was wondering if they were aware that I can hear all this shit. Handler A, confirming. Handler B, confirming. Active Handler group. This is HQ. Air France flight XXXX, of course my goddamn flight, returned to Cornerstone event launch position, awaiting parameter correction. Finally, they got back to me. Interloper. This is Handler B. Do you copy? Interloper. Come in. Loud and clear, Handler B, I responded, fighting back the urge to wish him good luck in his future job hunt. Interloper, please return to the initial spatial coordinates of departure from your host timeline. Once your spatial coordinates are approved, your temporal coordinates will be reset. Please continue routine to ensure Cornerstone event success. Right, great. So I go back to the security gate where this whole mess started. My good friend Handler B resets time. I board my flight, then crash and die, and ensure that the Cornerstone event is done in my timeline. Wouldn't that be a right, heroic sacrifice? Roger that, interloper will comply, I said. Hell fucking no, I thought. I'm typing this note just in front of that ominous security gate that froze time the moment I passed it. If I understand the handler correctly, the moment I pass it again, time will restart. One way to find out. See you on the other side. Final update. Okay, so it worked. I'm typing away from the same bar I was sitting at, except now everything is in motion again. All is well now. Well, almost all. As soon as I passed through the gate and everything suddenly reanimated, I began to feel a bit nauseous. Was it the fact that after hours spent in a frozen, soundless, and timeless world, suddenly the hustle and bustle of reality returned? Or was it because I was still hungover as hell, and it didn't occur to me that I could have nicked a paracetamol while time stood still? Dunno. But I needed to shake it off and get the closest thing I could to a cold shower, a thorough face wash. Except as I was drying my mug, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, the eyes of my mirror image started to blur and proliferate. Who knows, maybe soon I will have to invest in some large dark aviators. I can also catch some unusual changes in the corner of my eyes. Is that a poster of Elvis over here? That sign that was in English just a moment ago, is it now written in Cyrillic? But apart from these minor inconveniences, most things seem to be okay. So, am I about to board a crashing plane? Nah, as you may have figured that I am not great in following instructions. As soon as I was back, I set my VPN up and sent a couple of anonymous emails to airport security, to the police, to Air France, letting them know that something is off with that flight. I see that it is delayed now, and they are replacing the craft, citing technical issues. If I'm actually losing it, and imagine the whole thing, I probably ruined the day of my fellow travelers. But if not, then I just helped those poor bastards to live to see another day. But about the implications of me doing that, well, so all sunshine and rainbows, right? I ought to pat myself on the back. I fucked around with beings beyond time and prevented a major accident. Yeah, normally I would, but there are some subtle things going on that overshadow my urge to celebrate. See, the eerie sunglasses wearing part of the crew is still around, and they definitely look a bit more agitated than before. And while I couldn't really catch all their conversations, here and there I hear some jumbled radio fragments I still understand. They mention a certain cornerstone correction protocol and enhanced intensity events in close proximity. Now, what does that mean in practice? Hell if I know. And I know I am being pretty vague here, it sounds like shit is about to go down. Well, either way, they're calling my flight. Suppose it is time for me to leave this godforsaken airport. Story 5. I found a secret room in my basement, and something was waiting for me. I just moved into an old house in the middle of nowhere. It was cheap, and I was desperate to get away from the city. I figured I could fix it up a bit, make it cozy, and live a quiet life. The basement was massive, filled with old furniture and boxes left by the previous owners. But there was this one door I couldn't open. It was rusted shut, and no amount of force would budge it. It was only a week ago that I finally decided to break it open. I grabbed a crowbar, thinking maybe there was a small storage space behind it. I was wrong. The door swung open with a loud, creaking moan, and the smell hit me instantly. It was like rot mixed with something sickly sweet. I gagged, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and peered inside. The room was small, cramped, and the walls were lined with old, yellowing photographs. They were of people, hundreds of them. Men, women, children, all staring blankly at the camera. But the thing that made my skin crawl? They were all missing their eyes. I wanted to leave right then, but something caught my eye. In the corner of the room was an old, dusty box. It was the only thing in there that wasn't covered in cobwebs. I shouldn't have opened it. Inside were dozens of small glass jars, each one containing something dark and shriveled. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I heard whispering, like tiny voices coming from the jars. I don't know why, but I picked one up, and when I looked closer, I realized what was inside. An eyeball. I dropped it and it shattered on the floor. That's when the whispering turned into a low, guttural growl. I backed up, ready to run out of the basement, but the door slammed shut on its own. The lights in the room flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, but I could feel something moving, crawling around the room. I switched my flashlight back on, but it was dim now, barely lighting up the room. That's when I saw them. Faces. All around me, pressing against the walls, their eyeless sockets staring right at me. Their mouths moved, whispering, but it was like they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I thought I was going insane. I ran to the door and started banging on it, screaming, but the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. I turned around, and one of the faces was inches away from mine. It smiled, a sick, twisted grin, and I could finally make out what it was saying. "Thank you for letting us out." The door burst open, and I stumbled out, sprinting up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed a dresser in front of it, but I could still hear the whispers on the other side. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for whatever was down there to try and get out. I called a locksmith the next day to have the door sealed shut. But when he arrived, he told me there was no basement door. I took him down there, and it was gone. Just a solid wall where the door used to be. I haven't gone back down there since. I hear things at night, scratching, like nails on a chalkboard, coming from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes I catch whispers, faint and distant, echoing through the house. And every morning, there's a new photograph slipped under my bedroom door. They're pictures of me, and in every one, my eyes are missing.